Hey everyone, it's Nightharo here, and today I got a guide for my Unkillable Infinite Sustain God Mode, Super Chungus, Epic something build. No, for real though. For those of you who watch the channel for a while, you know that I don't like to do things like that because I typically find them to be disingenuous at best and to be straight up lying to people at worst. When someone says unkillable, they never mean an actual content that is super hard. They almost never mean trials, right? Like, what does unkillable mean in a trial? Bosses will absolutely still one-shot you. It doesn't matter what you do if you're not doing mechanics or if you're not holding block or etc. And their build is probably not going to change that. But anyways, I digress. What we are going to do today, and what I do want to give you is how you can make any class as survivable as you'll probably ever need it to be, assuming that you still are doing those basic tanking things like blocking when you need to, dodge rolling when you need to, and otherwise doing mechanics. And that's the hard part, right? Like, the build itself is like the easy part. And that's why all of us YouTubers do build guides, because that's the easy part. Actually explaining to you how to play the game, there's a lot of nuance, it's fairly complicated, there's a lot that goes into it. So anyways, but at least today, we're not talking about skills as far as your skills as a player. We're going to talk about some skills that you can put on your bar. We're going to talk about some gear that you can swap up and which to do first and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, preamble out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about it. So now on your front bar, you want a sword and board bar because it has increased damage mitigation compared to a frost staff because of various passives. And I'll pop them up on the screen real quick. Now, the next thing, first thing you need on your bar is going to be a taunt, okay? So pretty much a no-brainer, right? You're going to put on Pierce Armor because it provides the maximum buffs for the group, and you're going to put that on your bar. Now, the next thing you're going to put on your bar is also going to be fairly straightforward, at least for most classes, and that's going to be your self-heal. Okay, so you're looking for some sort of self-heal. And if you're like, well, I'm new to, X class, what should I use? Look for something that says scales off of max health. And generally speaking, that should always, a bell should go off, that's a tanking skill. And if it heals you, that's probably your class heal, okay? So you're going to put that on your front bar just so you can always access it, so it's there when you need it. And then the third thing you're going to generally put on your bar varies a little bit more. So we started off, everybody's going to have the same taunt, Pierce Armor. The second thing, pretty much everybody is going to have a class heal, regardless of what class you're on. And then the third thing you're going to go with is, it now varies quite a bit more. So for half of the classes in the game, they have a shield, a class shield, and that's what you're going to use. So for a sorcerer, I believe it's Hardened Ward. For a DK, it's Igneous Shield. And then for a Templar, Blazing Shield? I'm sorry. And then for a Templar, it's Radiant Ward, not Blazing Shield. Blazing Shield is a PvP morph, which is why it popped in my head, because I sometimes PvP on them. Anyways, I digress. So those are going to be your three main things. Now, for the three classes that don't have a shield, a class shield, there's probably going to be something else. And I'm not going to go into that today just because there's 6 classes, 3 of them would have to cover a lot of detail. Just look for something that will keep you alive, increase your damage mitigation, and there's actually one other skill you could throw there that I'll talk about in a second. Now, though that's your basic stuff, right? That's the stuff that you should almost always have on your bar if you have it. A taunt and a self-heal, absolutely. If you have a class shield, it's almost always the third thing you're going to put on your bar. And then it's like, okay, well, what else can I go from there? So the first thing I would recommend is Flare. And the reason for that is it provides you with major protection, which reduces your damage taken by 10%. And that's huge. Really huge. The cool thing about it, you don't need to use the skill. You don't even need to morph it. It is pretty deep in the PvP skill line, so it is a little bit hard to get to. But once you get it, you put it on your bar. You don't have to do anything else. Now, one thing I've noticed recently is I've seen some people that have double barred Flare. I think that's fine if you really need to do that. In most situations, your front bar is like your damage mitigation bar and where you want to spend most of your time, especially if you're worried about dying. And so you shouldn't necessarily need to double bar it. It's just excessive. If you spend most of your time on your front bar, you don't really need it on your back bar. You could instead put some skill that has like a 10 to 25 second duration on that bar and just flip back, hit that skill, and then flip back to your front bar for the damage mitigation. All right, and then the last thing you're going to go with, or the second skill that we really applies to all classes, is going to be defensive stance. And the reason you want this on your bar is not to actually use it. It's just like Flare. You're going to put it on your bar, and just by having it there, it's going to increase the amount of damage you can block by 10% and reduce your block cost by 10%. So that's really cool. So all of your blocks are now going to cost less, and you can also block more. So that's awesome. Can't go wrong with that. Put it on your bar, leave it there just like Flare. Don't need to press it. And actually, you want to be careful about pressing this because it is a little bit expensive and it costs stamina. So generally, you're just holding block on your front bar when you're trying to stay alive. You don't want skills that cost stamina. Now, the third skill you could potentially use, and this could be if you don't have a class skill or something else, would be low slash. And low slash, though, one of the things that I will say is it reduces the damage the target does, provides minor maim, reduces their damage done by 5%. The reason you might not want it is because if you have a Nightblade in the group, their shade provides minor maim. And if they're a Nightblade in the group, the chances are they're going to have shade, and then it's going to be already providing that minor maim. If that is not the case, then something like low slash would be a great skill to put here instead of, if you don't have a class skill that's really useful, you could put that on here instead. But just realize there are other sources of minor maim, and it might already be on the target, and so that's why I'm not saying absolutely put that on your bar all the time. Now, the last thing to cover is going to be ultimate. And this used to be a little bit more of a no-brainer. It's changed up a little bit now. So what I have here is Temporal Guard. And the reason you might want to put this on your bar is because it provides minor protection, which reduces your damage taken by 5%. Now, I will note for Nightblades, just using Dark Cloak provides you with minor protection for 10 seconds. If you are on a Warden, you can remorph your ice armor to instead provide you with minor protection. It's called Ice Fortress, your Frost Cloak. Instead of going with Expansive Cloak, you would go to Ice Fortress, provide you with minor protection for 25 seconds, so forever, okay? And that would be a back bar skill you would put on, but it's going to provide you with that minor protection already. If you're on a Necromancer, you can instead use your Agony Totem. The problem with using Agony Totem in a survival situation is it costs a lot of magicka, and so if you're and it doesn't last very long, so you're having to cast it so much you could run out of magicka, and then you're dying because you can't heal or do something else. So I don't really recommend it, even though I run it quite often on my Necromancer. I don't actually recommend it for a survival build. Okay, I recommend it when you're trying to use that to help the group, either keep them alive or give them an extra synergy or something like that, or for crowd control. There's other reasons to use it. I typically wouldn't use it to just stay alive because, again, it kind of defeats the purpose with it having a short duration and a high cost. Now, the other thing, if you are on certain classes have an ultimate that works really well. I mean, obviously the one, or maybe not obviously, but one of the ones that comes to mind for any of us who've played for a fair amount of time is a DK's Magma Shell. Magma Shell, you pop that and you can't die for 10 seconds for the most part. I mean, you can, but it's very rarely, and it's pretty hard. So Magma Shell is huge. It reduces your maximum damage you can take to a feather, and it just works really well. Also, being on a DK, you get back resources by using any ultimate. So Magma Shell is really good. Potentially Nightblades, kind of same deal. You could potentially use it to give you major protection. Anyways, my point is that look at your class ultimates, decide if it's good for you. I will tell you on a Necromancer that Bone Goliath, it looks so cool and seems like it would be so cool of a skill. It almost never works in content, and part of the reason for that is because in content, a lot of the damage that the boss and other things will do to you will scale off of your max health. So all of a sudden getting a ton of max health actually leads to you insta dying. Okay. So Rock Grove is one of those places. There's a few others. It usually doesn't work, and I usually don't recommend it. So in those situations, if you don't have a obvious class skill that you want to put as your ultimate, typically what most people run in, and you're probably already doing this if you've been playing for a while, is you're going to go with something like Barrier. And the reason you're going to put Barrier on your front bar is because actually for the passives. So it'll increase your magic or regen. And running out of resources is usually the main reason most tanks die, other than missing, unblocked heavy attacks will one-shot you, or missing mechanics will certainly kill you, but usually it's running out of resources. That's why you consistently die. And so the cool thing about what I'm showing you here too is that two of the skills that I just told you you're not even going to use. So you just put them on your bar and you're not even using them. So it's 2 skills that you wouldn't be casting or won't be casting during the content. So it can kind of help. And then the third skill will increase your magic regen, which is what you want. Now, moving to your back bar. Now, there's not a ton of stuff you can or really want to do on your back bar, but I will note a couple of things. So first off is Vigor, the selfish morph. The reason I recommend this is because it's a pretty big heal. It doesn't last for a super long time, but it's a pretty significant heal, and it costs stamina. So if you're running low on magic and you need a heal, you could swap back to your back bar, hit Vigor, and then go back to your front bar, and you've got a heal over time. Now, of course, you're going to want some source of major resolve. Typically, that's either a class skill or you can use balance, which works really well. A third option, and maybe something I'm hesitant to recommend this, is Immovable. So Immovable is the active skill from the heavy armor skill line. All the armor skill lines have one active skill, and for heavy armor, this is one of the morphs, Immovable. So the situations where you might want to use this are situations where you're extremely immobile, because when you use it, you're not going to be able to move for the duration, like 5 or 6 seconds. Now, I will note that the major resolve lasts for like 20, and so that's why you can use this instead of whatever else was providing with that major resolve. So you could use that instead. Situations, there's really 2 main ones that come to mind. The first is going to be Rakat, and typically, especially in hard mode, when he does his machine gun mechanic, that hits very hard. It's a bunch of hits. Having Immovable, you just need to stand there and hold block, so that works pretty well. The other place is Zalvaka, it's the last boss in Veteran Rockgrove, and she does her channeled swipe attacks, and typically you want to dodge at least one of those, preferably like 2. However, that can be a little bit hard when you're new, you're not sure at the timing. You can use Immovable, and then you can pop it. You can't move, but you can just stand there and hold block and you'll be fine. I will also note that if you accidentally hit this at the wrong time, or if for some reason you do absolutely need to move, you can still dodge roll, which costs stamina, and that's a problem, but you can still dodge roll, just FYI. Otherwise, you won't be able to move until the duration is up, and that can cause problems if you accidentally hit it at the wrong time. I do that all the time when I use Immovable, so it's why I kind of I don't know if I should recommend this, but just know it's a good skill for those couple of situations where it can be used. And then the third thing on the back bar is going to be Frost Clinch. Now, this skill is another one that I'm tentative about recommending. It does provide major maim, which is huge, reduces the damage done by the opponent by 10%. However, it only lasts for 5 seconds. And with some other stuff we're going to be using, on the front bar, I just don't know how often you're going to be using it. Plus, you have to switch back to a bar that has lower mitigation once every 5 seconds to 6 seconds to be able to use this and keep it up. It's probably not something you're going to want to do. The reason I still recommend it is because it also provides brittle to your group, and if you don't have someone already doing that, having a tank do it is a great option. And so you might need to get used to it. Brittle only lasts for 4 seconds, so you have to use it quite often, and that's not a terrible skill to get in a thing to be able to get used to doing quite often. And then after that, you're going to use class skills, whatever can help you survive, whatever sounds interesting. But that should be your bar setup. So on the front bar, that's the main thing we're going to be worried about. We're going to slot flare, doesn't have to even be morphed. Then we're going to slot defensive stance. For the passives, make sure you've got a taunt, you've got a heal, and you've got a shield if you have it, or some other class ability that will help mitigate damage. And then, of course, barrier, or you could potentially use, depending on your class, again, as we mentioned, and depending if you have the Psijic skill line unlocked, you could potentially be using temporal guard from the Psijic skill line. Okay, so that's your skills, and skills are what I would start off with by changing up, both because they're easy to do and easy to do very quickly and on the fly in content. And the other reason is because it's going to provide the least, usually your skills, even if they might buff the group, it'll usually be a relatively minor buff compared to those buffs from your armor and your 5-piece sets. Now, moving over to armor, okay? So the first thing I would recommend doing if you're having problems staying alive as far as changing up your gear is putting on the Master Sword and Board. And I will note here that the perfected version increases your healing received, which can be really cool. That's a good perfected bonus. Sometimes the perfected bonus is useless on some of these arena weapons. That one's not. However, you absolutely do not need a perfected version, and especially if you're new and you're watching watching this video, go get the unperfected version. It's so much easier to farm. Get that going, even if it's not in the perfect traits. At least you can put it on and you can use it and you'll have it, and then you can work on the perfected version at some later date. But having this is really good. So the cool thing about the Master Sword and Board is whenever you pierce armor, which you're going to be doing anyways, right? You're going to be doing that every 15 seconds regardless. It's going to heal you for 6,000 health, and then that can also crit. I will just note that. And then that provides you with resistances equal to the amount healed. Now, most tanks, and I've done guides on this and how to set up, how to make your own build, right? Like how to allocate, what kind of armor traits you want, doing all that kind of stuff. But part of that is that you end up, generally speaking, even if you don't try to, at about 27k resistances on most tanks. Now, if you add 6,000 to that, that's going to put you at 33,000, and that is above the soft cap for resistances, meaning that you can have more resistances than that, but it's not going to help you. Okay, it's not going to reduce your damage taken unless you have your resistances are reduced or something. You're already at cap. So that puts you at resistance cap, and that'll reduce your total damage taken by 50% just right off the bat. Now, the reason that is so useful is that applies to all damage taken. And that means it doesn't matter if you're blocking. It doesn't mean if it's a dot on you that can't be blocked or some other ability. It reduces all your resistances reduce all that damage. And so that's pretty huge. Especially when there's a lot of passive damage, like in Cloud Rest, in the last boss in Dreadcell Reef, whenever several of the mechanics that happen, there's a lot of different places. But again, it reduces light attack damage if you're not blocking, so it's a big deal. And it provides you with a heal, which is awesome, and all doing that while doing something you would already be doing anyways, right? So like, huge selling point here. You can't go wrong with Master Sword and Board. If you're dying in Cloud Rest, the portals, that's one of the first things I would recommend. If you're going to swap out some gear, put on Master Sword and Board. Now, moving on, the last thing we're going to talk about here is going to be your monster set. Now, in my last video, I kind of hated on Mighty Chudan. And, my point in that is just that there's something better, and that's why I don't recommend it. Instead, what you want to use is Engine Guardian. And the reason you want to use Engine Guardian is because it will proc pretty much all the time, constantly. When it's off cooldown, it will proc generally within a couple of seconds, and so you'll have it up about 50% of the time. It'll actually be giving its active benefit. Now, its benefit, it either gives you back magicka, stamina, or health. And the health is significant. So if it procs on health, you're going to be getting healed a bunch, and it'll keep you alive. Cool. More opportunities to heavy attack, get back resources. Again, if you don't know when to heavy attack, that's usually the reason you're dying, is because you're not heavy attacking enough to get back resources. I have a video on that. Not what we're talking about today, but just know there's one on the channel. The main deal is that if it gives you back health, obviously it's healing you, keeping you alive. You just need not to die to one-shots like a heavy attack that's unblocked or mechanics or something. If it procs on magicka, you can use that to heal yourself and to cast other damage mitigation abilities like shields. So, okay, that'll help keep me alive. If it procs on stamina, that's a situation where, okay, cool, well, if I'm holding block, I might need more stamina, and that's awesome. Okay, that'll give it to me, and then I have it. All right, that's great. The other situation is, what if you need to heal yourself? You've got stamina. Well, how do I turn that into healing? Well, there's two ways. One is you have Vigor on your back bar, so you swap back, pop Vigor, come back to your front bar, and then now with the Master Sword and Board, you can just taunt. And not only can you taunt and will it heal you, you should be taunting, because the resistances only last for 5 seconds on the Master Sword and Board. And so ideally, I usually try to do it every 6 seconds. Whenever I'm just trying to stay alive and go really high damage mitigation, every 6 seconds I'm pierce arming on my front bar, and it gives you a 6,000 health heal, and it increases those resistances up to the cap, which is about another like 9 to 10% damage mitigation, depending on your build, your setup, and how much the heal actually procs for in content, because it can crit. So with all those things, you can turn. The reason Engine Guardian is so good is it doesn't matter what it procs as. It doesn't matter with the Master Sword and Board. Even if it procs on magicka, you can turn that into health. If it procs on stamina, you can instantly, by pierce arming, you can pierce armor every second if you want, every GCD, and that'll keep your healing up. And then if it procs on health, it's just a huge heal. And so, you can't really go wrong there. So with all these things, with the Master Sword and Board, Engine Guardian, and changing these skills, I've honestly, I don't know that I've ever put all this stuff together at the same time. I've changed out and done all these things at various points. I don't actually know that I've ever put all of these skills for survival on my bar at the same time because I've never needed it. And I'm not saying there's not a situation where you can't or you shouldn't, but like even like single tanking Sunspire or Rock Grove or something like that. I put several of these and done some of this stuff, but I've never done all of it because I've never needed it. Now I might have a lot more experience than you. I play ESO a ton, so realize that you might want to put all this stuff, but then just realize that over time, when you're like, hey, I'm not dying, I'm fine, I'm hanging out, you can gradually kind of take these things off and add back on, maybe sets that'll buff the group, like Nazare or Encratis for your monster helm. Maybe switch a couple of skills off to be able to do something else for the group depending on your class. But just changing out these skills, changing out these gear sets, this should be able to get you to survive through pretty much anything. Certainly all veteran content, all non-hard mode content, and even probably most hard mode content. Okay, you don't need to put on leeching plate. You don't need to do all this other kind of stuff that people talk about, unkillable god mode. I mean, if you absolutely have to, definitely change out a 5-piece set if you're still having problems. But honestly, if you're doing all the things that I just recommended, you're pierce armoring every 6 seconds and you're still dying, it's almost certainly going to be to either mechanics or a heavy attack, some sort of one-shot mechanic. It's probably not going to be from damage over time, and it's going to be from either overcasting skills a bunch or doing something else. But anyways, that's it for this video, guys. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if it was down in the comments below. Please share it with other people. And hey, if you have questions about trials, about build setup, stuff like that, I'm streaming quite a bit now, and I'm just waiting for questions to pop into chat. So come check out one of my live streams. If I'm doing a trial, I'm usually asking for like, hey, if you have mechanics questions or how does this trial work, that's a better question than like, hey, tell me about my Templar DPS. How do I do this? Probably not something I can help you with during the trial. But if you're like, hey, I'm dying at this point, what am I dying to? Or hey, I'm having problems with this heal check, drop into the chat and ask me some questions. I'll be doing some Tales of Tribute soon, and who knows, maybe some solo content as well. I'm pretty interested in doing that. So if that's something you're interested in, again, let me know. And yeah, that's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching. I love making content for ESO. I love making content, period. So I appreciate that you guys give me the opportunity to do that. So thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.